One of the main teaching points of this pattern is a French seam, and the reason we wanted to include that is that aprons as a garment will get worn and washed a lot. So the idea of a French seam, you can see on the one I'm wearing here, is that all of the raw edges of the fabric are actually enclosed on the finished garment. So they don't fray over time, they're really neat and tidy, and they're really satisfying to sew up as well. So we're going to show you how to do that. It's the first part of sewing that you do when you're constructing the Hepworth apron, and you lay out the front of the apron with the right side downwards like this. So initially you're putting the wrong sides of the cloth together. So I'm now going to take one of my back panels. So again, the wrong side is going down onto the wrong side here, and we're matching the notches on the long seam. So I usually remember it, the first step of a French seam is that the garment actually looks like it's going to do when it's finished with the right sides outwards. And we're going to first of all sew a row of stitching down here, which we then trim and turn inwards. So it kind of feels wrong because it's the opposite to how you normally sew a seam, but it's right, trust me. So you lay them out, matching these notches, and then you want to place some pins along this seam here. And at this stage I tend to just pin with the head of the pin sticking outwards here, so you can keep that pin in right until you get to it with the machine needle, which means there's less room for your fabric to shift. So again, every 3 or 4 inches, keeping your edges nice and straight, you can place some pins ready to sew. And at this stage you can also put on the other side to save coming back, like so. Just have your pins going out. So now we're ready to get the machine with our matching thread and start to sew it up. So another top tip, when you go to the shop to select your thread for sewing up your Hepworth apron, if you can take a scrap of your material, that's really helpful. And then get a couple of different colours that you think are about right off the shelf, open them up a little bit and lay them on top. And then step back a little bit, a short distance away, half close your eyes, and the thread that you see the least is the thread that you want to then go ahead and sew with. And if you're not sure, if you struggle with these spools to actually pull the thread out in the first place, then a little trick that lots of people don't know is that these actually just screw out like that. So if you unwind them in the shop, you can then just make sure that you pop it back in before you put it on the shelf. So now we're ready to start to sew up the Hepworth apron on your machine. We've got some really useful videos on our website that talk you through getting your machine set up if you haven't used one before, how to wind the bobbin and how to set up the spool and everything, so you can watch those if you need to. It's important to make sure that you have the correct needle in your sewing machine that suits the fabric that you've chosen for sewing up your Hepworth apron. So in this case, this is a cotton linen mix, and the best way to test it really is to get a scrap piece of your fabric, and if you've got some different needles, actually, rather than using a pin, actually take the machine needles and put them through the fabric and just see how easily they go through. If you feel a kind of that it's a struggle to get through, or you hear a popping sound, then that's not a good sign. You want, if that's the case, you want to have a finer needle. I can feel that that's going through nicely. This is a size 70. This is what we'd recommend using on the linen that we sell with our Hepworth Apron kits, or on a cotton. If you're sewing up a denim apron like this one, then we would recommend using a denim needle for your sewing machine. So you can put that in, and then the next point is the stitch length that you're going to use. So the length of each individual stitch that the machine makes as you sew, and throughout our instructions we tell you at each different step which stitch length to use. So for these French seams we recommend between 2.5 and 3, which you can see on the dial just here. The first row of stitching for your French seams, we've recommended a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is quite close to the edge. If you happen to have a 1/4 inch foot for your sewing machine, then you can use that. It's one that we often use when we're quilting, so we have plenty, but it's really useful because then the black guide here just sits on the edge of your fabric and your needle position is automatically 1/4 inch from the edge. However, if you don't have one of those, then another easy trick is to get some washi tape or some masking tape at home and measure the distance from the needle. Usually the plate on your sewing machine will have different measurements, so it tells you there's 1/8 of an inch here and 3/8 of an inch, so a 1/4 inch is between those two, and the line's marked here. But sometimes when you're sewing longer seams it's quite hard to keep an eye on that. So if you take a length of washi tape and just line it up where that 1/4 inch marker is, which is that line there, but bring it down so you've got an obvious line here to follow. So before you start sewing, you can line up the edge of the cloth and then pop the needle in to there. And then we're ready to start sewing. So it's a good idea to go forwards and do a small back stitch at the start and at the finish so that the seams don't unravel them. And off we go. So just a small back stitch. Then you can remove the horizontal pins as you come to them. So when I'm sewing, I tend to not be looking at the actual needle. I'm focusing that the edge of my fabric is on the edge of the line here, and it's easier to keep a straight line if you're concentrating on that. You can see now that I'm coming up to one of the notches that we used to match the sides of the apron before we started to sew. So you ignore that for the seam allowance and sew past it, and we'll snip that off when we finish this seam. Just checking that everything's fine, and actually the thread is a really good colour match because I can hardly see it, but that's good, that's what you want. So you're going to sew all the way down this seam, so this is attaching one side of the front bib to one of the backs, and then you're going to turn and do the other side as well before we go over to press them before we get to the second stage of the French seam. So as I'm coming to the end, on this machine here, this is the reverse button, so you just press that down and do a little reverse stitch to the end, and then lift the presser foot, and you can use the thread cutter there just to trim those threads. So we're going to now press the first stage of the French seams. So the fabric is the right side up, and before I do that I'm just going to snip away the notches now, like so. And I'm going to take the iron that's the right heat for the fabric that you're using and press it in one direction. It doesn't especially matter which one, but both seams in one direction. When you've pressed it, if you can see any really loose threads like here, or if you're using a particularly fray fabric, then just snip those away. Now, and then we're going to turn this over. You can see now that it just needs a press on this side as well, so that it's not, you can see slightly that the seam here is just casting a little bit of a shadow, so we just want that to lay really nice and flat before we form the next part of the French seam. So this time I'm just going to press and at the same time gently pull the fabric away. If you wanted to have a damp pressing cloth on the top, then you could do as well. It's easier for me to show you here without that. So once you've pressed your French seam on the right side of the fabric, you've pressed it going the same way on the wrong side, the next step is to take the seam and fold right on the edge there. So you just have to roll the fabric back slightly so you get it sitting really flat on the edge like that. And then we'll press that also. You can finger press it without the iron, but it just makes it a little bit more defined. With a French seam, if you sew too close to this edge with your second row of stitching, then what happens is you don't actually manage to encase the raw edges of the fabric, and you could end up with some of them poking out on the outside of your apron, which you don't want. So you have to pin and then this time sew the seam a little bit further in so that you know that they're all safely tucked away in there. I'm now sewing the second lot of seams on the French seam, so I'm just going to shift the seam allowance to 3/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to move the washi tape across. And then I've got the fold on the outside and I'm stitching down here, removing the pins as I go and still doing a reverse stitch at the beginning and the end to secure them. Like I said before, you can usually feel if you're getting too close to the seams that are underneath, because the needle feels like it's suddenly going through more layers of fabric than it should be and will make a noise. You can also try and just feel the ridge with your fingers as well, and make sure that you're just to the left of it so you're not catching it. People also use French seams for down the sides of jeans or on children's clothes that are going to get a lot of wear, because in a sense you've got 2 rows of stitching holding those pieces of fabric together rather than just one, so they're stronger than just a regular seam. Nearly there. Reverse stitch at the end, and then cut the threads. Once you've finished stitching, when you turn the apron out to the right side, if you've enclosed all of those raw edges, then you won't see anything on the right side. If you've got the odd strand of thread, like that one there, then you can just snip that off or pull it out like that. And then what you want to do is take the apron once you've done both and press on the wrong side of the fabric, press the French seam towards the back of the apron on the wrong side, and then just turn it over, and also again press it away in the same direction on the right side, and then you can get a really nice flat seam, and then you're ready to move on to the next stage.